Welcome to Stories from the Mat with Jan, a quiet place for families, educators and experts to come together and build confident learners from the very beginning. I'm Jan, let's begin. What if the most important part of learning isn't what a child knows, but how they feel while they're learning? Welcome to Stories from the Mat with Jan. I'm Jan Falconer, children's author, mum, aunt and grandmother. Through my books, ideas and practical tools, I help families raise confident learners. In this episode, we'll explore why confidence comes before curriculum, how children learn naturally, and why comparison can sometimes get in the way. We often measure children by what they know, their letters, their numbers, their milestones. But in the early years, what matters most is not what they know, it's how learning feels. We talked about this in the first episode, and from everything I've seen in classrooms and families and over time, confidence comes first. Confidence precedes curriculum. Before a child ever sits at a table to learn, they have already mastered something extraordinary. They've learned to roll, to crawl, to stand, to walk, to run. No one hands them a lesson plan. They just try. They wobble, they fall, and they try again. They learn language, emotions, meaning. They notice, they question, they experiment. And in all of this, something is quietly developing. Confidence, curiosity, and that willingness to try. We live in a culture that compares. And when we compare early, we often worry early. I know this because I've done it myself. There were moments when I wanted progress to happen more quickly. Moments when I probably rushed something that simply needed time. Most parents and carers will recognise that feeling, I'm sure. We want to help. We want to encourage. But sometimes development unfolds in its own rhythm. I remember from when I was quite young myself, I used to babysit these two little girls when I was little. They were struggling at school and had begun to think that they weren't good at learning. They found reading difficult. The other struggled with maths. But what struck me was that neither of them lacked ability. One loved drawing and had an incredible eye for colour. The other was naturally sporty and seemed able to turn her hand to most physical activities. I wish I could. One afternoon, we sat with a box of crayons and we talked about colours. We wrote the names of the colours. We counted the crayons. We sorted them into groups. Looking back, I wasn't doing anything particularly clever. What I was really doing was starting something they already felt confident about. That stayed with me because neither girls were struggling because they lacked potential. They simply had strengths that weren't being recognised at that moment. And perhaps that's one of the reasons why I've become increasingly interested in people who challenge our assumptions about learning. One of those is a very special man called Todd Rose. What interests me about Todd's story is that his story wasn't a straight line. He left school early, became a young parent, faced challenges that might have led many people to underestimate his potential. He returned to education, continued learning, and eventually became a researcher at Harvard, a very respected professor. But it isn't the Harvard story that fascinates me. It's the question he asks. What if the average person doesn't actually exist? In his book, The End of Average, Todd Rose explores how we've become attached to the idea of average. Average height, average weight, average age, average reading age, average attainment. But when researchers examined thousands of people, they discovered something quite surprising. Not one individual in that study or any studies actually matched the average across all measurements. Not one. And once you hear that, it's difficult to look at children in the same way, because if there's no average adult, perhaps there's no average child either. Perhaps children are not supposed to be developing in exactly the same way, at exactly the same pace, in exactly the same order. Perhaps each child follows their own pattern. When we focus too heavily on averages, we risk missing the individual child standing right in front of us. That resonates with me, because children rarely develop in a straight line. They grow in spurts. Think about it. In patterns. A child may be confident in one area and still finding their feet in another. And that, some people think, is a problem. And that's not a problem. It's simply part of being human. Another thinker I often find myself returning to is Howard Gardner. Gardner is a developmental psychologist, best known for his work on multiple intelligences. Whether you agree with every aspect of theory or not, I think the central idea remains incredibly helpful. He suggests that people are intelligent in different ways. Some with words, some with numbers, some through music, some through movement, some through understanding other people, some through understanding themselves. What I like about this idea is that it encourages us to look beyond the narrow measures we sometimes use to judge success. Because many of us have met children who are clearly capable, curious, and thoughtful, yet don't necessarily shine in the areas that happen to be measured first. Todd Rose reminds us that there is no average child, and Howard Gardner reminds us that strengths show up in different ways. A different picture begins to emerge. Perhaps confidence doesn't come from being better than other people. Perhaps confidence comes from discovering who you are and being encouraged to develop from there. Some children need additional support. I know I did. And that support matters. And so does patience. Not everything develops at the same pace. Not every strength appears at the same time. So what creates confidence? Now, in my experience, it comes back to 3 simple things: attachment, attention, and attempt. Attachment says, you are safe here. Attention says, I see you trying. Attempt says, keep going. When those conditions are in place, confidence grows. Not suddenly, not all at once, but steadily, quietly, over time. Confidence doesn't begin when curriculum starts. Confidence begins when a child feels safe enough to try, seen, safe, encouraged to try. Because when those things are present, learning has somewhere to go. Not pressure, not comparison, but with connection. And perhaps that's where we begin. Not with what a child knows, but with how they feel while they are learning. Because when a child feels safe, seen and supported to try, learning often follows. And this is something I continue to be deeply curious about, because the more we understand how confidence grows, the more naturally learning can unfold. So over the next few days, perhaps notice a child who is learning something new. Notice what happens when they feel encouraged. Notice what happens when they feel seen, because confidence may be developing long before we've even seen the result. And just as we explored in the first episode, children are learning far more than facts. They are learning what learning feels like. This is Stories from the Mat with Jan, a quiet place to think, notice and begin. So thank you for joining me. Until the next time, take care.